page 544. Okay, question number 1, how do we deal with Vayikra?
How do we deal with what?
Vayikra, how do we deal with korbanot? In other words, we're going to go ahead and, if you want, theoretically, you can sit down, and I could run through the different types of sacrifices and what are done with the fats and what sections are burnt. Where to put the fat that comes from the diaphragm, if it's put on the head, under the head. I could go ahead and discuss about which animals are slaughtered from the front, which ones from the back, which... I'm getting no's? What do you mean? So therefore, the next question is, what do I do with Vayikra now that I got a no for that? You know, like the butcher shop. The butcher shop approach, it seems like doesn't work, right? It's not entertaining, even though yes, there are those eating popcorn, but it doesn't seem like it is entertaining.
This isn't a show.
With that, you never know. So with that, we're going to have to take another approach. So there are 3 approaches, not exclusive. In other words, you could go ahead and what we're going to actually do is bring them all together. But there are 3 ways of thinking that we're going to adapt to deal with this portion. Okay? One will be the rational approach. One will be the spiritual approach, and one will be the approach of the Balei HaMusar. In other words, it's an approach of learning and trying to find ethics that are referred to in this portion. You know, in the beginning of the 20th century, for many great rabbinic authorities, technology was fascinating, complex in the halachic realm to figure out how to deal with these new things. But for some of them, it was an opportunity to bring across messages that are very much part of our tradition. In other words, our tradition always addresses the fact that what is achieved here in the physical realm has an effect in the spiritual realm. We can't sense it, we cannot see it, right? But nevertheless, there is some kind of effect. So modernity was able to offer them some kind of a metaphor, some kind of mashal, some kind of description of something that's tangible, that yes, you could do something here and there's an effect there, because look at electricity, for example, right? I could switch on a light here and switch on the switch here and the light goes on there. Wow, you see, electricity teaches you this concept that which is done here can have an effect somewhere else. Now we could do even more with it with Wi-Fi, right? Because there's some kind of Wi-Fi. There are waves. There are many things we could go ahead and learn or use from technology to explain to us physical beings about the spiritual realm. Now that was done very much so with the Ramban's approach of studying this portion. In other words, Ramban, Nachmanides, 13th century, lives in Barcelona. You've been to Barcelona. Lives in Barcelona, makes his way eventually after the debates of 1263, makes his way to the land of Israel, arrives in 1267, settles in Yerushalayim there, passes away in 1270. Ramban, Nachmanides. Nachmanides is from that movement that is countering the Maimonides effect. Right, we're going to address Maimonides' Rambam soon. Rambam is no longer alive by then for many decades. Nachmanides is taking the approach that you cannot rationalize everything. Not everything in our tradition can be explained. But rather, you have to accept the fact that there are things that you will not understand, and there's a cause and there's an effect. And therefore, doing specific acts here in this world have an impact in the spiritual world. The greatest of all acts in the physical that have an impact are actually korbanot. So there's a tremendous tikkun. There's a tremendous fix in the spiritual realm for all those damaged vessels that exist up there. So much of it is achieved through korbanot. So this is what the Ramban is telling us. So very Kabbalistic. It's mystical. Right? And you don't understand it, but say specific things, pray in a specific way, you're having an impact. you set aside the human intellect. That's the Ramban's approach. He's not an extremist, but he is really countering a different philosophy, and this is the era, right, where Kabbalah becomes more and more popular. In other words, the Zohar is discovered then or written in whatever approach you take during that period of time, because you want to counter the rational thinking with the mystical. Now, the rational thinking is always dangerous, because if I start rationalizing things and then the reason no longer applies, so if I only address and see value in a specific practice due to the fact that the human mind can comprehend it, so if my human mind no longer comprehends it, I'll move on. Why should I go ahead and do so? If the mitzvah of a specific, if the mitzvah of covering the blood of a bird, that when you chef the chicken, you have to cover the blood afterwards. If that's to teach me sensitivity, so if I believe that I'll learn more sensitivity by owning a cat, right, and treating it with honor and dignity, so could be I can rationalize that me taking care of my cat has more of an effect than just covering some blood. So I'm going to go ahead and graduate from the old practices because I rationalize them. If I believe that by doing it, suddenly, ding, 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 in the spiritual realm, these incredible things are happening, and angels are being created, and these angels are beautifying the spiritual realm, and I use my imagination, as these Kabbalists did, to go ahead and describe this wonderful image. So if I don't rationalize it, I'm just going to follow suit. Right? That's the Ramban's approach. Tikkunim ba'olam ha'elyon. It's going to fix things in the spiritual realm. So the rabbis of the 20th century explain this approach of Nachmanides, the Ramban, by comparing it to a koach electri. There's an electric effect. Okay? So this is an approach where we have to really step back, forget about really understanding things, because it's not about understanding, it's about accepting. That's approach number one to dealing with the korbanot. Approach number two, of course, predates it, and that's the Rambam's approach, Maimonides. Maimonides believes that the Torah was given to humans, to a human being, to a specific generation. In that generation, there was a specific way of thinking. There was a specific way of practicing whatever they did believe in during that generation. Okay? So now, during that time, people had spiritual urges. A spiritual urge, one that we do not relate to. But they felt, people were quite overwhelmed by the world. They had no understanding of how things function. The Talmud notes that when there is a solar eclipse, right, it's a terrible sign for the world, right? A solar eclipse, it's not a good thing, right? It's like they compare it to a king who walks in with a flashlight, but when he's upset at the people who are partying too much during his evening get-together, what does he do? Shuts off the flashlight. Ooh, right? So God is shutting off the flashlight. And this is not in our culture, but if you study the history of the Mayans in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, right? And you talk about the fact that a solar eclipse was, you got to shecht a lot of virgins to satisfy the gods. Otherwise, he's going to be upset. And there would be there some kind of priest who would do some kind of motions and sing and dance. And if the priest was a good choshev priest, right, if he was a great spiritual man, he had the ability of getting the sun back out after the eclipse. And this was done. So this is the society that they lived in, that they were afraid of spiritual forces. They had this urge to go ahead and satisfy these spiritual forces. So the Torah is given to that generation. Okay, so just as the Torah tells us, okay, you have an urge to eat, let me tell you what to eat. Okay, let me tell you how to go ahead and process the food. What yes to eat, what not to eat. You have a sexual urge, let me guide you what is yes acceptable, what is not. You have a spiritual urge, so let me go ahead and share with you what should be done. And remember, what Rambam, Maimonides, is telling us is that it is far more significant the fact that it is given by the higher being than the actual meaning itself. Okay, it's not intrinsic value, it's extrinsic value. God gave it to us, It is important to follow that law. It was given by God. It was given due to the fact that it was a pagan practice at that time to cook the young kid in milk. It was a pagan practice that time to go ahead and for priests to shave the sides of their head. All these were part of the norm during that period of time. You don't do it. Okay, that's the Rambam's approach. And now, when we go ahead and we're going to read about Korbanot and their details, what God is telling us is as follows. Oh, you have an urge? You have an urge to go ahead and bring Korbanot? Wonderful. Let me tell you where to do it. Let me tell you where to do it. Now, people ask the question, whenever you share Maimonides' Rambam's approach, you ask, wait a second. If this whole section, right, and this whole portion is given to a generation that has a specific spiritual urge to bring sacrifices, right? To burn them for the sake of some kind of great force. We no longer have that urge. Why do we still have to practice it? Okay, that's a question that is always asked. And the answer is you have to compare it. Imagine, my mother always shares that among her grandparents, and this is very common for that generation, your generation, that among her grandparents, she only met one grandmother, meaning one of them perished before the war, one was perished during the war, one of them passed away afterwards. She never had the opportunity to meet. Her grandmother, her father's mother, who made it to England before the war, my mother grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. Her grandmother was in London or Manchester, England. And she had the opportunity of seeing her once when she was 17 years old. She had to be in Israel. She saw her once. Okay. Now, she has stories. She has stories from it, right? Stories of her turning, these were Germans, these are Yekis. So one of the stories she shares is the fact that she had her button closed, and the Yekisha grandmother told her, you have to put it up a little bit higher, like that we don't go with the Litvisha leniencies. That's what was the line used. And like prophetic, because she landed up with a husband, right, who was a follower of many Litvisha leniencies. You have to be careful what you say. Right? So she shares stories from that 24, 48-hour experience with her German, with the Yekisha grandmother. So I'm going to add something that didn't happen. Okay, but let's say, imagine as she is by her grandmother, they had a few boxes of cereal on the refrigerator. That's where we keep it, right? Boxes of cereal. And this cannot happen by a yek, but nevertheless, the story will be presented, and several of them are open. And she decides, it didn't happen. Okay, I don't want my mother calling me after watching this that she's upset at me that I said such a thing. It didn't happen, but I'm just trying to make a point. Imagine she pulls off the Cheerios, and the grandmother says to her, oh, the Cheerios are actually stale, try something else. Okay, imagine. So she puts back the Cheerios and she takes off down instead the cornflakes. Fine? Let's say afterwards she decides, in other words, due to the fact that it was such a wonderful experience to be with her grandmother, and she knows when she leaves that she might never see her again, and she never saw her again. Imagine if for the next 40, 50 years she decides that she's not going to eat Cheerios. Okay? Sounds a bit mishuga, maybe a little bit, but on the other hand, by seeing Cheerios eaten by others and she doesn't, what she is doing, what is she doing? She is re-experiencing those 24 hours she was able to spend with her grandmother. Right? So it's not the Cheerios that are significant, but it is those moments. She wants to relive those moments because they were so special for her. And that's how we are going to view what's happening here. The significance of what we are reading about the Korbanot, yes, it was given to a specific generation. And for that specific generation, it was extremely relevant. They needed guidance, and we'll analyze what kind of guidance was given to them. They needed guidance. For us to value it is due to the fact that it was given by the Almighty, that one time that He revealed itself, the 24 hours or that event at Sinai, that is what gives it significance. Right before class, I got a call from my brother, my younger brother. And he surprised me. He just called that he's happened to be in Israel. Wow, we have a cousin who's marrying off right now is a child, and my brother's close to him. So he decided to pop on a plane with his two daughters, and they went in for 48 hours to Israel, which is interesting. So that was his shocking. He was excited. He was able to see my son there. So this younger brother shares with me. His name is Avidan. He's a psychologist. And he shares that he still has a difficulty of reading Time magazine. Why does he have difficulty reading Time magazine? Nothing to do with the fact that it's a bunch of Narish guys. Nothing to do with it. He'll read Newsweek, all of a sudden, but he won't read Time magazine. Why would he not read Time magazine? So when we grew up in Israel, we didn't have no internet, of course, and limited amount of news and media from outside of Israel. But my father would get once a week Time magazine. Once a week, that was the way of getting an update of what's happening in the world. My father would read it cover to cover. Right? To know exactly the way Time magazine feels the world exists. But often, other brothers, not this one and not me, won't mention names, would go ahead, and when they would see it before, they would take it and they would read it. And sometimes when you read it, you leave it in the kitchen and next to the sink and it would get wet. So sometimes they would damage the Time magazine. And my father would bother him, and there was a warning that Time magazine is not to be touched. In other words, when it arrives, right, even though he comes back home late, Time magazine is Kodesh Kadashim. Don't ruin my Time magazine. So therefore, there was, so for my younger brother, who's 6 years old, he remembers those words, don't ruin Time magazine. So until today, he is afraid to pick up a Time magazine because he might ruin it, right? He's still recovering from that experience. Sometimes an experience is something we live with. We take guidelines from not the significance, not intrinsic, but rather extrinsic value. So that's the Rambam's Maimonides approach. Now, if you read the book of Melachim, the book of Kings, it gives us the story of the tail end of David HaMelech's, King David's life. It talks about the success and failures of his son Shlomo. It talks about Shlomo's son Rechavam, who had the greatest challenge perhaps of all humans, to grow up with an amazing father and not recognize that he's not his dad. Right? So when the northern kingdom turns to him and says, listen, Rechavam, you're a sweet guy, but you're not your dad, and therefore for your dad we were willing to pay high taxes, but for you, forget it. So this was very, very insulting, and he turned to his young advisors, right, with big egos, and you know how it is with politicians, egos, they destroy their own personal world and the world around them, and he tells them, go fly a kite, and there's a break. We have the southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom. Unfortunately, as the northern kingdom loses its attachment to Jerusalem, they become pagan, one after the other. Almost all the kings of the northern kingdom are very much attracted to pagan gods of the region, right? So if some other nation that existed during that time worshipped the Baal and worshipped the Asherah, they got to do it. And Jews, if they do it, they got to do it much better, right? There are left-wing thinkers that exist, that are extremists. So who creates the best left-wing thinkers in the world? We do, right? Noam Chomsky has to be Jewish. And you go through the list. We're going to always be better in all areas. And unfortunately, often these are not ones that make a great contribution to our nation or to the world. The southern kingdom of Yehuda, which included the area of, of course, Hebron, Yerushalayim, and the area of Binyamin, which goes up to Shiloh. They were much closer and far better off on the spiritual scale. But they had one challenge that existed, and this appears several times in the book, that yes, they were better, they were pagan. However, there was one problem that still existed. And the words of the Navi are, Rak habamot lo saru. The only problem that existed with the southern kingdom is that bamot, the problem of bamot, still remained. What exactly is the problem of bamot? Bamot, a bama is an altar. Okay, a personal altar. So the norm was you would come to someone's house in the backyard or in the front yard. They would have a small altar. In that smallish altar, what they would do is they had a desire, they had an urge to burn limbs of animals. They would slaughter an animal and burn limbs to satisfy God, our God, it happened to be. Now, it works as follows. When the people of Israel entered the land of Israel, and their central location was not permanent, in other words, when they entered the days of Yehoshua, they have a tabernacle with them. They establish it on a very temporary basis in a place called Gilgal. It was temporary. Most Jews did not have the ability of making their way there. Right? It was wartime. So you know what God said to the people of Israel? During this period of time, when we do not have permanence, I allow you to offer sacrifices, some sacrifices, not ones that relate to sin, but if you want to go ahead and burn an olah, you want to burn an offering for me to relate to me, it is permissible to do it on your own personal bama, on your own personal altar. It's fine. We don't have permanence. Now, things changed, and eventually they settled, and in a place called Shiloh, where the shul made a visit there exactly, or a little bit more than 3 years ago, in a place called Shiloh. In Shiloh, they had permanence there. And God said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that bamot are no longer acceptable. Not during this period of time. Now we have permanence. And what's the idea? That if you have permanence, then you can do it. So it works as follows. The natural tendency of a human at that time was to have an urge, a desire to bring a sacrifice. You must do it. So God, explains Rambam, understands the nature of these humans, and he says to them, okay, you want to bring a sacrifice, come to the central location called Shiloh, and in Shiloh there's going to be a priest. And the priest is going to be kind to the people around him. He's going to teach you a few laws of the Torah. He's going to teach you the laws of tzedakah, of giving to the poor. He's going to give you the laws of being decent to other members of society. So therefore, your spiritual urge, right, it will be fulfilled in this central location. But at the same time, you're going to learn about the essence of our tradition. Fine? Now that can only work if there is a permanent structure that actually could welcome people coming in. And the roads are such that you could go ahead, the infrastructure of the nation is such that you could make your visit to that central location. But during those 14 years in Gilgal, where it didn't work, God cannot tell us, do not bring any sacrifices at all. People had to do it. And therefore, God says, you know what, you don't have permanence? I let you. You don't have to, but if you have an urge, it's something that I understand. I let you do it in your own background. Don't do it for a sin, right? Because it is only there to fulfill and to give you that fix. And that's what happens during that period of time. So the first 14 years there in Gilgal, God says, Bamot, okay, we're okay with it. They come to Shiloh, and they're there for 369 years, which is a long time. God says, here, absolutely not, we have permanence. After that, due to the fact that there was a battle and Aaron was taken away, so for a period of 57 years, the tabernacle was, again, not in a permanent location. God gave green light again for the Bamot. Finally, Yerushalayim is chosen for eternity, and God says, we're finished with that. Bamot, nope, you have a spiritual urge? Okay, I understand. Come to Yerushalayim and be inspired by the righteousness of the Kohanim, the kindness of the Kohanim. Come to Yerushalayim and you'll see the court there, and you'll realize that you're supposed to study the law and analyze Jewish law and analyze the essence of Judaism. Don't allow the korbanot to be the essence of your religion, because then, unfortunately, you are very similar to the nations around you. The goal of these korbanot is to fulfill my word, and it was only given to you due to your nature, but the goal is to bring you to the center location, to the temple in Yerushalayim. Bamot are no longer acceptable. That's what happens in the days of Shlomo when they build the temple. But you know how it is? The nation couldn't overcome it. And therefore we are told throughout the book of Melachim, Rak habamot lo saro, that they couldn't. They controlled themselves and they went through steps to try recovery from this urge to bring bamot. They couldn't. They were addicted. It was so much part of who they were. Now it wasn't a sin that's as bad as paganism, because it was still to relate to Hashem. But the problem is that they were doing it without being guided. Okay? So that's the history of God working with us. God understands where we're holding, and He works with us. Korbanot are given due to the fact that He understands human nature. So these are basically two approaches you have to keep in mind. The electrical approach, right? The approach of that you are having an impact in the spiritual realm, as Ramban and Nachmanides presents. The rational approach that it is given to a society, and if you understand, if we would have lived then, we would have understood Rambam to the fullest. That's approach number 2. And then the teachers of Musar come up with a totally different approach, which is perhaps one we could take with us as we analyze the text. But now, turn to page 546. So page 546, we are told, look for example at verse 7. Verse 7 is talking about after, and I don't want people, you prefer I don't go through the exact cutting of the animal, so I skipped that. And I didn't read verse 6, where it talks about skinning the elevation offering and cut it into pieces. I'm not going to read that. It's because I'm coffee, and we don't want to go ahead and do that. However, in verse 7, V'natnu bnei Aharon hakohen esh al hamizbeach. In verse 7 we are told that the sons of Aaron, on page 546, the kohen, shall place fire on the altar. Ve'archu, and what should they place on the fire? They should arrange some etzim, wood, on the fire. Ve'archu, verse 8, Ve'archu bnei Aaron hakohanim, and now the children, the sons of Aharon, right, the kohanim, shall arrange the pieces, the head and its fat. Skip that. But listen to the second half of the verse. They should arrange it on the wood, al ha'etzim, which is asher al ha'esh, which is on the wood. Asher al hamizbeach, which is on the altar. Now there's repetition here because we were told, put wood on the fire. And then when we are told that you should put those limbs on the wood, we're told place the limbs on the wood, which is on the fire, which is on the altar. Why the repetition? So the approach number 3 is let's look for symbolism. Let's look for symbolism. And there are many cases and many details we can analyze and find some kind of symbolic message here. Message here, for example, is that when fire always relates to the spiritual urge. It moves upward. It's not controllable. Fire is tremendous, right? It gives us heat. It gives us light. We could cook with it. We could survive a bitter winter with fire. But if you do not manage your fire, you're going to destroy the world around you. That's a reality that exists. And that's what the spiritual urge is about. Spirituality is good if it's contained. If it's not contained, you're going to be flying planes into buildings. It was a spiritual belief, right? It was faith that guided such people. Spirituality is fire. What protects our fire? What protects our internal and excitement and enthusiasm for spiritual beliefs? What protects it from going out of the boundaries? It is the halachic system, right? There's a system. Here it's fine, this is not okay, right? A system of law. And the system of law is compared to the Eitz Chaim. Eitz Chaim, why is it compared to an Eitz? An Eitz is a tree. It's alive. It gives life. Right? It's alive because we have to realize that the Torah and the laws of 2,000 years ago perhaps need a little bit of adjustment due to the reality we live in. It is organic, correct? So the Torah, the legal system, is compared to wood. To have an altar and you want to have fire, we always have to mention the fact that the fire will be always together with wood. Keep the fire, keep the enthusiasm together with wood. Now you need fire. If you can only have wood, nothing is going to burn. And if you only have the legal mind with absolutely no excitement at all, don't think that you can transmit and have the next generation appreciate your faith. You need both. Symbolism is approach number 3, and you take like Rabbi Hirsch, and you read his Chumash, you realize that he is reading this whole portion, all finding symbolic meaning. And I'll present another one on page 548. 548 is talking about a bird offering. And when it comes to a bird offering, and I apologize, we're going to have to do a few details of the processing of the little bird. Okay? Look at verse 16. Vehesir, he shall remove. The what? Murato. When you, after the bird is processed, you remove the crop, but it's done benotzata, with its feathers. And you throw it near the altar. What's the idea of removing? What is the idea of removing the intestines, right, of the bird? So the rabbis tell us that birds fly around and they have great freedom and they eat whatever they desire, right? There's no concept of private property when it comes to birds, or really when it comes in Toronto to the who's the one that flows over my garbage can? My raccoons. Maybe raccoons shouldn't be brought on the carbon as well. But in any event, their stomach, which symbolizes their stomach, which eats from all that it finds, symbolizes a lack of sensitivity to someone else's property. So that's really what's necessary here. We are told that often bird offerings were brought by people who could not afford a whole animal. People that could not afford, they justify the fact that they could take from others. I remember in Chile, we had help at home. That I think it was about $10 for 7 hours. You would get help, to clean the home, which is a good deal.
A sender here?
Well, send her here, yeah. But then the price shoots up. So Miriam would ask the help a little bit about how they live in their, how they survive. So she responds, some we work, and if we don't manage, merobaron. In other words, we just steal things. In other words, it's given. In other words, there's a society there are those who have. There are have-nots. So you work it out, right? You don't need a Robin Hood. You could just go ahead and take. It's given. It's given. I'm in difficulty. The free market is not working for me personally. I have every right to take from someone else. This is a way of thinking of humans. And often bird offerings were brought by the poor. So therefore, the poor person standing there and watching this bird offering, it's a moment of relating to God. They take out the stomach and they throw it away. And he turns to the Kohen and says, well, what do you mean? It's a little bird I bring. I want more to burn. I want a lot of smoke. I want to see my offering, that I can show my little boy chico that you see that smoke up there? It's for my bird. And the Kohen says, you know what? Birds are not sensitive to take from others. So the section that benefits from others, that is not really theirs, that can not be placed on an altar. So imagine the impact of the message. The impact, and you don't have to insult the person. You don't have to accuse him or her personally of misbehavior, but there's a message there. And that's what the visit to the temple is all about. A message about what our religion is about. It's really the threat of always religion could turn into something that is not the true purpose of the religion. I remember hearing from a Hasidic teacher that the Hasidim, right, in the 18th century were feeling that Jewish faith lost its soul. So they brought in practices to awaken them, right? So the men, for example, would go before prayer to the mikvah. They would meditate about the mikvah, which symbolizes a new beginning. So they would meditate about the fact that they're starting a new beginning, it's a new life, a new moment, a new opportunity to relate to God. So they would enter into prayer with great enthusiasm. That's what they would do. So what happens? A few generations later, they still go to the mikvah, but they have these techniques of zooming in, undressing in seconds, jumping out, running to the prayer, praying very. In other words, they just made it part of the routine to get it over with like everyone else. What happens is that things that are introduced to our religion become the religion, but we forget that no, they are there as tools to relate you to the higher being. That's what's really the danger of all faith. And the temple, a Bet HaMikdash in Jerusalem, it is not there for the sacrifices. It is there to come together to a place where there are other values. And we hope that the educators are the ones that live by those values and can inspire others. That's how we view the book of Vayikra. So there are different approaches, but there's always a warning that comes with it. When, and this is what the prophets tell us, Mi bikesh zot miadchem, these are the words of Yeshayahu. Who ever asked you, Ramos Chatzerai, from stepping through my courtyard? In other words, the prophet complained about the people, that they valued sacrifices, but it ended. That was the whole religion. If that became the whole religion, God cries out, I don't need it. I have no interest in such service. It was given to you to think about me, to relate to me, to understand what I am really about. You made the whole religion about something very, very, very specific. Right? Come Pesach. Pesach is coming. Right? And you're going to ask questions about the Pesach and the matzah and the chametz and what kidneys, yes and what not. Let's not allow our religion to become the whole picture. In other words, the whole religion can turn into how much do I have to drink, how much do I have to eat, or is that item okay or not? And we forget about the idea that it's to relate us to something so much greater. That is a danger that exists, and therefore we need awakening, reminders. And this is a portion that we should seek out and search, of course, for those reminders about what faith is really about. Thank you for coming. And everyone have a wonderful day.